Welcome to episode 1 of Thinking Out Loud. Let me get the jitters out. For the folks at home, Thinking Out Loud is a podcast platform that I envision where I could invite some of my close friends and people of interest to kind of help me think out loud and process in the open. And, right now, we all clearly are processing, whether it be in the open or not. We're processing, so I just...
And whether we like it or not.
Whether we like it or not. Good point. Very, very well said. So I wanted to bring on a dear friend of mine, a professional therapist, psychologist. You can correct me, if I misspeak. I wanted to bring you on because, again, you can bring a more clinical approach to, or viewpoint, of what the world is really going through, right now. And maybe we could start at a macro level, like as you see it, how is the globe adjusting, or what is actually the trauma that they're experiencing, if you could point that out.
These are just my observations, and where I may study human behavior and the human mind for a living, I don't want this to ever come across as me being the all-knowing or the all-being. And so I like to put that out there as a disclaimer that these are just really my observations. And we all have the power to have observations.
Sure.
Mine just come with maybe $200,000 and some odd in student loan debt. So they may be an expert in somebody has given me a piece of paper saying that I have an expertise in the human brain and studying behavior.
Right.
So with that being said, to go back to your original question, the trauma that I really believe, and I'll do the United States macro and then do global macro, because I think our macro as an entity of the United States is a little different than the world, just based on our privilege as Americans.
Right.
I think our trauma is ourselves. Many of us in this pandemic and in this quarantine have found it extremely difficult to be with thyself. And as Americans, we have created a culture that it has become socially acceptable for us to fill our life up with stuff, whether it's things, whether it's time. Like, we are filling up every morsel of our day, whether it's meetings back to back, whether it's, working 60 hours a week, and whether it's taking only 2 weeks vacation. Like, we fill ourselves up with stuff. And I think that it's a much more unique position than the rest of the world. But I think it's because we are a society that struggles and has intense trauma around just being with ourselves, because there is this feeling of just shit that we don't deal with.
Right. I mean, I
whether
think
it's the secrets, whatever,
Right. I mean, I think to that point, you feel we're such a competitive nation, and we have to kind of stay focused and intentional with our actions, and in that it's so hard to just be carefree. The moment
beating the next person, and like working, you said, that competition.
Yeah. I mean, and as Black people being always told that we got to work twice as hard, right? So
twice as smart and 4 times as fast.
Right. And to that, I know you probably have seen the meme that has gone around. So there's been 2. And the first one is, if you're not taking this time to start a new business, solve the world's problems, then
end world hunger,
come up
and
with a cure for
homelessness.
AIDS, like if you're not spending your time curing cancer, then you ain't shit,
Right.
And then there was the one that followed it and said, hey, it's actually okay that you're traumatized right now. You're going through a process. And even on my personal side, like I came out the gates looking at this like, okay, this is a window of opportunity to pivot in many ways. Or, I felt on a personal level like, my God was shaking me loose of a lot of the sort of middle of the road thought that I might have, like not wanting to let go of certain things. And this was the window where I can kind of step into it, largely my creative interests, and so I was really for the first maybe 2 weeks, like I was buying stuff online. I created a studio in my apartment, like I shifting around my artwork. It wasn't always like this in this corner, but
you see my background. It's a hot ass mess because I'm in the process of painting right now. This is a hot mess. I got paint.
I'm way too vain to jump on camera and to not be just a little bit sexy. Like I'm mellow with it, but it's got to be spicy.
And see, I need to learn that from you because I don't give a shit about the sexy. I dig good putting on chapstick.
I mean, the producer aspect, like I looked at it like,
sure.
You know what, I'm going to produce, a podcast. I've had the idea for a while, I've been toying with it, and
I love it.
I felt like this was the window where my voice could be necessary. I think a lot of people reach out to me. They want to hear from me, people checking in, sharing their thoughts. So I figured, let me create an environment where I invite people into my process, like literally how I survive emotionally, physically, financially, intellectually, like this is, I've always been autodidactal, I've always been a self-learner. I read constantly every day. I read like 3 or 4 articles of something, it's almost like from one article to the next, I'm just
you're filling the layers. You're good at going into those rabbit holes. Like you'll read an article and then that article will have a reference and then you'll take that reference and then find the article on the reference and then go like
your
rabbit holes have been serious, bro.
Like, most of my day, about 30% of my day is in YouTube rabbit holes, like, or some research, you know what I mean? Like, like there's a big part of me that's like this really nerd dude that is just.
Yeah, you are a cultural anthropologist.
Yeah, definitely. And I didn't know that at first. Like, I just kind of did it. And then somebody said, hey, man, you're actually doing anthropology. And I was like, oh, shit. Like I felt a little esteemed, after that. And move with a different.
Just a little bit.
Yeah,
like just a little bit straighter. Adjusting your tie.
I was like, I never thought about that. Thank you.
Right.
Now I'm about to reinvent myself for real. So, but this for me, I've had to give myself permission. Like in any moment of trauma, to feel, to kind of be, disappointed, to feel powerless, to be like, I can't save the world right now. There's nothing that I could really say, like I shared a video early on about creating some sort of framework of survival, right? And surviving the panic, which was the video I shared with you about the 3 F's of managing the panic, and initially I had like 7 or 8, and I was like, here's 7 F's, and I'm like, nobody's gonna watch 7 F's, bro. Like slim it down.
I'm glad that you could.
Yeah. I mean, I still feel like that video was too long, but I just wanted to give people tent poles to make it easier to shrink the experience, because sometimes trauma
is overwhelming.
Like that's kind of the first, phase is feeling overwhelmed. Like, this is out of my grasp, like this is bigger than I could.
This is bigger than I can control or I can handle or I can't
stomach
even, or I.
Right. I can't wrap my head around, when it's like a moment a day where I kind of say to myself like, oh shit, there's a global virus, that's taking people out. It's like one time a day.
And folks are dropping.
Yeah, that folks are really passing on from it, like dropping everywhere. Like I have a friend in London, I have a friend in Tanzania, another one in Ghana that I kind of speak to on a regular, and we're all in the same space, like we're all kind of focused in on how to defeat this thing from all of these different spaces, and even though in those areas the numbers aren't as large, the risk is still the same.
It's great,
Right.
and I was actually, Kevin and I were watching, our tradition is watching NewsHour on PBS every night. And they were speaking about how
Interesting.
East Africa is, and this actually impacted me a great deal where it made me cry, where they're being impacted by not only the coronavirus, but also locusts.
Mm.
And so they have this huge outbreak
Like at the same
of
time.
locusts
Wow.
that is eating up all of their crops, and it's just like really devastating them on top of the virus. And I turned to Kevin and, yes, there are many parts of me that are very heathen-esque, but I'm a heathen with a purpose. I at least know the Bible. And
I know a few scriptures.
It made me, right, I know, I can recite some stuff,
I can quote a few, right.
I know a couple of commandments.
Right.
But it struck me because I said I would be petrified right now if I was in one of those countries, because locust represents the end of the world in the Bible.
Woo.
And so here you have a virus that is literally taking people out.
Right.
And you have locusts, which is a biblical representation of the end of the world.
Yeah.
And I was just like, yo, I'm blown. I'm blown right now. Like, I can't handle it.
I've always kind of saw the idea or the notion of the world ending not as an absolute physical implosion, right? Like the planet is not just going to drop out of the sky, but the world, the framework that we exist in, is it's actually ending right now. So, can, like, the world will be different, but it was different after 9/11, like we fly now, you still can't take a bottle of water through TSA. And that's a direct effect of 9/11, right? So things changed, on many different levels, but, I look at this and we could choose to look at this through different lenses, right? Like we can focus in on conspiracy theories, right? Like we could only choose to look through this from a lens of conspiracy and say, this scientist, this vaccine, or we can choose to look at it from a religious standpoint, from a biblical standpoint, prophetic standpoint, and say, is this God's will? Like what hand does He play in this? I mean, these are choices, and I think no matter which direction you look in, you still got to survive, right? Like you still have to make,
and you still have to make a change, no matter what path.
Wow.
You choose to look at it from whatever lens you choose.
Interesting.
The common denominator is there's a change that you must accept and take away from in whatever capacity.
Right.
So I think that's the part that is going to be very interesting to me as we continue to roll this out and process through this time. What does that look like?
Right.
Because we have no choice.
Period. I mean, physically, we have to be more cognizant. I mean, right now we're in what they call the mitigation, the quarantine, which will not really let up, even after there's a vaccine in place. So we know now that, vaccines take up to 18 months. They got started on the vaccine in January. So the estimate is that in the spring of next year, there'll be a vaccine for the public, potentially one in the fall for emergency workers, but not for the public until 2021. But even then, again, referencing 9/11, even though that moment has been long gone, there's still change that still remains, in our lifestyle and the way we move around. So I definitely feel like traveling through airports, they're going to have some requirements, about vaccination, and, you're going to have like some up-to-date medical papers before you jump on a plane at some point in time. Like, I don't know when they're going to put it in play, but it's going to be in play. And then work.
I mean, even for us as people from California who live here, we're switching over to the real ID. And that's something that's implemented where we're not even able to travel to another state with, if you don't have a passport, you need a real ID. And if you don't have a real ID, you can't go to Vegas. You can't go outside of the state of California.
This is already, or this is coming in?
Yeah, this is actually, so when
during the quarantine.
When or if no, not just during the quarantine. This was in place, at least 3 or 4 years ago, where once your California ID or driver's license expired,
got it.
You then are being required to get a real ID, which then allows you to travel. I don't know all the stipulations, but I know one of them is it allows you to be able to travel outside of California.
Right.
If you have a passport, it doesn't.
It's fine. Yeah.
It doesn't impact you. But for people who don't, that's the way to move. So thinking about that, we were already making moves to make it maybe even more challenging or whatever you want to call it. But this is going to be an addition. I think vaccination papers.
I think about Africa. I was headed to Nairobi a few years back for a show that didn't actually take place, but it was planned, but dealing with the promoters we were dealing with, it just got kind of funky. But prior to the show, there was a hysteria amongst the band, like, do we need malaria shots? Yeah, because malaria is heavy there. But in the end, traveling to Africa from the U.S. to certain parts, you don't need shots. But if you touch down in Africa and move to other countries, then,
most people do.
Yeah, which most people do. So like if you fly to Nairobi and then say, hey, I want to go to Angola, the authorities there are aware of the exposure that you might have had in certain countries, and they'll require papers or, and they recommend, like they sell malaria pills at the airports in some of these spots. So I feel like...
And I think that's something that is I think, a really important point, because when going back to your original question about how the U.S. and then globally, focusing on the U.S. once again, we have been really privileged.
We haven't had to deal with
really privileged,
right,
to be able to move a certain way within the state and even internationally.
Right.
We don't know what it means and what it's like to be stopped at a border and ask for your vaccination papers or to ask, that isn't our lifestyle.
Right. Did you get your
shots? And that's what has made us so complacent. Our privilege has made us very complacent. That's why I feel like there's a difference in the trauma that we are experiencing right now and the trauma that the rest of the world is experiencing.
It's layered.
I do believe that the rest of the world has had complex traumas already, that the coronavirus was just one thing, but it wasn't so significant that it took people out of their ability to have normalcy.
Right. Interesting.
Because their normalcy is already in a particularly traumatic fashion.
The feeling here, what you see on the news, we're focusing on what our current president could have done or didn't do and what have you. But I think to even overly focus on that is to be blinded to what's happening to the rest of the world. You know what I mean? It's like, it's a complete distraction to kind of spend your time based, about what his missteps. Like, my feeling on that is we'll have more than enough time, right? Like after this is done, you can entertain that all day long. But he's not the president of Italy, Spain, London, the UK, or France. We need to be critical of our leaders without a doubt. But I think...
And I think that right now, I want people to... my hope is that people will develop a sense of understanding on a, yeah, we can blame him. We know he's not the best person and the best.
Right. Yeah,
those things are evident. My hope is that we begin to shift even a paradigm of creating more space for empathy, creating a space for gratitude. Because to your point, our per capita, our death rate per capita is less. And it's not to dismiss what we're going through. It's to have gratitude for where we are and to have empathy for those who per capita is higher than us.
Right.
And so my hope is that in sitting with our shit and starting to work through that,
right,
somewhere in there it will allow us to have gratitude. Somewhere it will allow us to develop empathy, because that's also when you get caught up in the hype and in the distraction, we lose sight of that.
Interesting. We focus less on somebody else, and just focusing on,
which is another distraction. It's the same way that it's replacing working 60 hours a week by calling the president an idiot. For me, that's cut from the same cloth.
Wow. Right. It's filling in that space, like sitting here, kind of on the hamster wheel, following every news lead, and instead of operating from a gracious space. Now, I'd be the first to say he doesn't make it any easier with his antics, obviously, but what I encourage people is to kind of look past and look at the task force, look at the scientists, and look at the decisions that were made to mitigate, what we're dealing with. Because here in California, I share it, obviously, we're a dense city as well, but we actually did mitigate early when we cut off the border to China. 50% of the cases here in California are from Wuhan directly, and 30% is the medical workers, first responders, kind of passing amongst each other. And then 20% is, I don't want to say lack of social distancing, but that 20% is being pushed around.
I'll say it. It's lack of social distancing.
Not just the shots we see of the brothers in the hood playing ball and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But there are essential workers, people that still are out there moving around, with a high exposure rate. So that's the three groups, that they've been able to trace in terms of the strand here in California. And, 8,000 nationals coming over to California a day from China, I believe stopping that helped, right? So, and it's not not to like celebrate him in any stretch of the imagination, but to just point out things that I'm grateful for. Being in California, I think about my mother, who lived in Flatbush last year. If she was still in Flatbush, if she was still living in a 17-story building with like 10 apartments on each floor and people coming and going and her not taking it serious, and I'm gonna go to the store, I need to get out, I need to go here, and then coming down with something and now it's too late, So there are things that I've found on a personal level that I'm grateful for, and grateful for not being in places that, would have a harder time to recover than, what we have here. So I was curious to know, you have clients, have you gotten more clients as a result of this? And what are like the overarching concerns, or, what do you see as hurting people the most during this time?
So I
if you can, like, I know you can't.
Oh yeah, no. I mean, there's no confidentiality. I can't say nobody's name, but yeah, of course, I can give anecdote. I've been really blessed, and it's a double-edged sword for me, because where it's a blessing for me to say that my
business is
caseload has picked up like 60 to 70%.
Wow.
That also means that there are more people that are out there suffering. And so I don't want to celebrate and be like, yeah, I'm busy, and because my work, unfortunately, people don't utilize me the way that I feel that they should, which is as a preventative care.
Got it.
People come to me when shit has hit the fan.
Right.
And I would prefer that that's not the case, but that's just the nature of my work that, once someone is struggling with an intense or an extreme amount of anxiety, or their depression has gotten so out of hand because they're isolated and they don't know how to deal with their emotions and their feelings without popping a pill or drinking or whatever, and I guess also saying that many of my clients, actually 95% of my clients are creative. So working in particularly music.
Okay.
So working with artists, working with music executives. This has been a very trying time, as you know, being a creative yourself.
Sure.
For creatives, for people who are used to bopping and dotting in these streets.
Right.
Doing work outside of the home 100% of the time, going to the studio, whatever it is, it's a very social environment. So going back to that notion of people are just having a really difficult time with being still and being still with themselves. And so that has been what the overarching or the consistent theme of the work that I've been doing with people.
Interesting. I think for me, because I was raised the only child, right? And so I spent a lot of time alone in my imagination as a child, and then in my adult life, I worked from home for the last 6 years. I've been completely, isolated most of my days. So the transition for me has been slight in comparison. I think a lot of the things that I'm battling with is that so many people ain't got nothing to do that they want to call me, It's like, now they got a lot of free time. So now my space is being crowded with people who want to talk, they want to text, they want to hear back. And I'm like, look, brother, I enjoy the solace. I try to commit myself to introspection as much as I can. One of the things that I'm curious about dealing with artists and speaking to the ones that I know, and I've seen a lot of platform discussions where there's this idea that people feel like this is a perfect time. I can't wait to hear what these artists come up with. But creatives in many ways have to be emotionally available to create, So if you're overwhelmed and you're traumatized, it doesn't necessarily mean that your function is, outlet. For me, my art...
Actually, it's the complete opposite.
Right.
Because what I've realized in working with artists, and even execs, because there's an art form to being an executive as well, is that you have a rhythm on how your process goes.
Sure.
So if you are, I watched the 2 episodes of the Bieber doc on YouTube.
I haven't seen it.
Whatever. They're like little 15-minute segments of Bieber and his comeback. It's really just a visual or a visual press release for his album that came out.
The setup, yeah.
But hearing how he processes, his process of a year before he starts on a record, he'll just tinker on the drums or on the piano or on the guitar, and then 3 to 6 months later, he'll do some writing, just journaling. And then 3 or 6 months after that, he'll, it's 9 months of preparation before he even goes into the studio to cut anything.
Right.
And so many times an artist has a flow about them, the way in which they create. This pandemic has interrupted that flow.
That flow, right.
Has interrupted and come in between, yeah, I may have a whole lot of time, but I'm used to hanging out with friends and getting inspiration from that, or, going to festivals and seeing my peers on stage rocking out and killing it. That inspires me. That gets my competitive nature going to then go into the lab and start cooking. You know what I'm saying? So this has interrupted their flow. And even though people have time on their hands now, this isn't a time of creativity. It's really a time of trauma.
Sure.
Especially as our apex, as we're reaching our apex and people are being impacted directly by death. People aren't dealing with that when they're going through their creative process. Right. But now you may be an artist and your grandmother's best friend died.
Right.
From the virus. Or, your homie, whatever it is. And so it's not a typical time of space and solace that everyone is treating it as.
Right.
On top of highly creative and highly anxious people already.
Right. That's got other layers that
has multiple layers.
Yeah. So
and multiple underlying things. Right. Like, we both know people who rely on things to get them through.
Sure. I think for me, trauma has fueled some of the things that I've created, like writing and stuff like that. And if I'm traumatized enough, I could write in one setting, like I can really just pour in to what, I'm thinking or let out rather, but I think the journey of this trauma, which is still kind of ongoing, like you said, as we're reaching the apex. So it's not like, I thought this week, I think last week I said, next week I'll have the emotional space to focus on some of the ideas that I have to put together. And then the week hit and it was like, this thing ain't letting up. Like it's just more information coming, more questions, more, so I don't think, I don't put on any artist that I know like, yo, you need to be in there doing this. Again, in the beginning maybe, but now it's like.
And where is the you need to be there? Because right now you can't cook the same way. You can't even go into the lab the same way that you normally would.
Unless you're
there's
like
a lot
really
of artists
self-contained, and have that space. But even that, again, it's like, I have an artist I've been working with. We have a video that's in the can. We waiting to premiere it to kind of roll him out. And the story is like a love story. And nothing in me says this is the right time to put out a romantic tune, like, like who's got the emotional space to be in love right now, in a certain way. I mean, granted, if you're in love, and things are cooking, but, I just don't feel like if you're a sensitive person, right? If you're an artist who kind of relies on your senses and what you're absorbing from the world, I can't see you being in the same world that I'm in and feeling comfortable talking about things, unless you clearly block it out. Like if you're able to block it all out, which, maybe, I don't know, but if you're present.
But the beautiful thing about artists is that there is such a heightened sense of empathy. We're also empaths. We feel it all. It's not like, artists are, and no shade to,
somebody
accountants or engineers,
right.
Or, the harder sciences, no shade to them. But there's a certain framework, there's a certain mindset that goes into being that type of person.
Right.
And usually a creative artist is a much more feeling oriented person. That's why they're able to go to those places with such ease and create beautiful work of art, is because they're tapped in. They
Right.
feel it. They feel,
Sure.
and it's not even their stories all the time. It's the stories
Of the
of
community.
being
Yeah.
perceived,
Sure.
the perception,
Sure.
and being open to other people's energy. So understanding and recognizing that you're still absorbing it all, just even though you're quarantined,
Right.
and it's a lot.
Right. It is. It is a lot. I mean, I think about a lot of the new music I've seen put out, and I have to break it up generationally because, you know, the younger generation may not be as tuned in, you know, to what's really happening, you know. But then you have millennial, Generation X, and then baby boomer, you know, like we all kind of look at this in a different sense. So I've seen videos about kind of the same sensationalism and aspiration, and, you know, and I just wonder, like, yo, who thought this was a good idea to put this out right now?
Mm-hmm.
You know, but some of it is still working and people are, you know, buying it into it. But I have to assume that that's like a younger generation that's not really, you know, really, yeah, they're not really paying attention. They're already distracted by their own interests, you know. But in my generation, I just can't see, you know, anybody being dismissive of the reality. And not that we should all sit grimly, right? Like what should we do? You know, like where is the middle? Have you been advising people on, you know?
You know, for me, I'm always going to be an advocate of feeling your feel. You know, feeling it all, and because a lot of us, this is many of our first go round with that whole introspection.
Right.
This is, I mean, even though,
yeah, this is it. Yeah.
I think creatives are may feel things, but this is the first time that I think a lot of people are like acknowledging their shit.
Right.
And having to sit with, oh, like all isn't good in the world, or oh, it doesn't matter the amount of money or the hits that I've made before. Like this shit is taken out everyone from every corner of the earth and every socioeconomic place.
Right.
Like this doesn't have a look to it at all. The damn Prince in the UK got it. You know, the Prime Minister got it. You know,
Right.
Prince Charles had it.
Wow.
So when you start to think about the people that should be exempt, they're not.
Right.
And the vice, if you could call it, because I like to just provide the space for people to have their own life lessons and come to their own. Because I find that when people grasp onto an idea or it comes intrinsically from them, it's a lot easier to integrate into your spirit. If I just go, well, are you doing this? Have you tried that? It can be dismissed a lot easier. So I really try to give people space and just be a container, a holding space for people to create their own look for this.
Got it.
But I'm always going to be an advocate to sit in your field, have them, acknowledge them, know that they're real. Don't minimize them. Don't swallow them. Don't shop them away, eat them away, sex them away. You know, really just be present.
Right.
A lot of us haven't been present for ourselves, for our families, for our communities, and for the world.
Right. Are there any like personal exercises that could help people become present? You know, like is there because to that point, I had a cousin, an older cousin who had substance abuse, And when he came from one of his treatments, he had a workbook. And in the workbook, it asked, him to identify his feelings, right? So, how do you feel? Like it's just from a general common question.
The hardest question, right? Which is such a difficult question when literally, especially as people of color,
right,
only have a very limited amount of feelings that we're able to have. And then when you think about men,
the range of emotions.
I typically say that men have maybe 4 emotions that are socially acceptable, maybe 6, and then black men, right? Black men is like 3 or 4.
Right. I've always saw that, I lament over the fact that we're always represented in the extremes. So to that 3 in particular, like we're either, a super villain or a super saint, or the magical Negro. There's never really space for kind of the middle guy.
Complexity.
The complexity, with the range of, especially vulnerability. Like black men have no, allowance.
There is no, that word doesn't pertain to black men.
Just skip right over us, So I think with the exercise and the workbook that I found, that my cousin had, it was kind of eye-opening, and I don't always practice it, but, I felt like if, what I took from it was like, if you can identify your emotions, then you could, access it to say, hey, I'm not feeling well. And, as on a personal level, there was a period in my life where I said, if I'm not feeling good, I'm not going to answer the phone, which seems, not feeling good as in I'm about to jump out of a window or anything like that. But like, if I'm in a bad mood, then maybe I'm not going to entertain certain conversations. I'll put them off and say, hey man, not even explanation, just put them off, only because I may transfer some of that energy that has me in a certain space at the moment, and I realize even to acknowledge that is kind of a privilege, right? How many people have a moment to even spare to kind of investigate their emotions to say, hey, how am I actually feeling? And then to have the ability to identify it, but
I would like to challenge that just a bit, because I do believe that we have taken it as a privilege, and there is a large part of it that is a privilege, and I don't want to minimize that.
Sure.
But I would like to even shift that paradigm and recognizing that it's a right.
It is.
It isn't a privilege to be able to have feelings. It's a right.
Right. So I'm actually looking at it in the wrong way, and I guess I only say privilege juxtaposed to a lot of people I see in the peripheral that
for sure. I think most people actually see it from your vantage point.
Got it.
I think the vast majority of at least our community sees it from your vantage point. I can't worry about the way I'm feeling. I got these bills.
Right.
These bills don't care if I'm happy, sad, mad, whatever.
Sure.
Like they still need to be paid. So I do believe that many of us look at it from your perspective,
which is how I was raised too. Like my father, like no space for that. But no,
but
you don't have time for all of that.
People share your same sentiment.
Yeah. Sure.
People share your sentiment.
Right.
And for me, that's the reason that I do the work.
Got it.
It's because I want to shift that paradigm
of it. Yeah, that's the paradigm
and
shift.
start to chisel away at this notion that having feelings is a privilege. Recognizing your feelings is a privilege. Understanding your feelings is a privilege. And for me, in my vantage point, it's a right. Because I don't believe that the universe, God, or whomever would have given them to us if there were stipulations on it.
Right.
So I'm like, no, it isn't a privilege to be able to have self-care. Right. That when you're at a low moment, you can say, you know what, I don't want to project this energy onto another person, so I'm not going to answer the phone.
Right. Right.
That's self-care.
Sure. Not just for me, it's
for all involved.
Yeah, for all
especially
involved.
if it was a family member.
No.
Because, we'll unleash the fury on a family member, but really understanding and taking, because we can't continue to do it the same way. When we were talking about whether you believe it in a scientific way or a religious way, there's going to be change. You have to change. This is one of those ways.
Wow. This is the paradigm.
It's another space.
If we hold on to it, if we allow ourselves this window as a kind of gift to reevaluate, process, and maybe kind of take note of the benefits, which I've seen some podcasts where other people are talking about how it's allowed them to reconnect with family and those things, which, should be something that on the backside, they don't just rush back to being busy, that they actually hold on to, what, when we were in quarantine, we did this. Let's hold on to that, so even if it's you alone, and you're now not inundated with the, the heavy load and of the work week, and you've done some things internally that you kind of allow those habits to kind of roll over, as you transition back or use them, as a designing tool of what the new life looks like, for me and for, the people around me. So.
And I even think about how even at least here in LA, when we go out to get our essential items and our essential things, how clear it is outside, because we're not inundating the earth with our cars and pollution and all that. Like my hope and what I'm attempting to spread and project is that we are our own personal earth. We are atoms and energy and neurons. Like, we are a part of the earth, and we have seen the earth radically shift and get well with the coronavirus.
It's correcting itself.
Happening.
Yeah, there's
a self-correction that is happening just by us leaving it the fuck alone.
That's heavy. Yeah, get it. I mean, I saw something about pandas in the zoo that were able to conceive that weren't able to conceive in the last 10 years, and this is with zookeepers prodding them, trying to get them to conceive. And now that there's nobody visiting the zoo, they're able to kind of.
When people leave things the fuck alone,
right,
we're able to heal.
Right.
And so my hope is that we take a page out of the earth's book, and in that stillness and in that ability to just be, really just be, that we will start to shift that paradigm, that we will start to heal those wounds, and that we will start to create a space within ourselves that is working towards being the best version of ourselves.
Right. Interesting. Well, I think that's a great space to close. Great takeaways for me. I've been working for a while, I'm a work in progress, but, definitely have taken some steps, but I'm going to continue to kind of remove the worry. I think being, responsible for more people than myself, definitely creates a different level of concern and worry. But, within those windows, I'm making sure that, I allow myself the same space to heal. But, I want to thank you for taking the time out for my inaugural show. you know,
Woo, 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 woo,
yeah,
woo.
man. So I'm gonna be attacking some other issues in the future, and I'm gonna definitely, once we get back to not necessarily normal, but once we arrive, in the new world, I want to, have more real conversations in person and, keep you in the loop because, I lean on your wisdom always. So I appreciate it. And
Aw.
tell my man I said what up. Tell him I said thank you for letting me borrow you for.
Will do.
All right.
Will do.
Cool.
Well, I appreciate you so much. And this is dope as hell.
Oh, shit.
And I'm really excited to see how this blossoms. And because you are such a fucking wealth of knowledge, like the way in which your mind works is so unlike any mind that I've ever had the privilege of engaging with. Like, this is a gift.
Wow. What's your cash app?
And you're going to be able to spread the masses, yo. You're spreading the good news.
Well, I mean, I think, I just want to share, I feel like I've had a journey that's been pretty special and unique and fascinating to me. And, I think I have a different POV. I read something once, there was like a documentary on HBO where this Italian dude, he's South American, somewhere in South America, like a real wealthy guy. He's like an heir to like some huge fortune. He said the duty of the wealthy is to cultivate spiritually, right? And for me, I kind of pulled that into my own life, and I've been lucky to get a certain level of freedom, which I value. I look at it as the wealth of my life. So to have that freedom, I use it to kind of focus on, cultivating, spiritually and thinking about the world in different ways. And, I think right now this is the window of time where I've cultivated a lot. I've thought about a lot of things, and, I want to kind of start the giving process, and sharing and not just hoarding, my critical thoughts, to myself. So, because I believe there's a lot more people that think and see the world in the same way that I do. So I just wanted to open up a platform of discussion, for all of us.
And this is your legacy.
So, yeah, indeed.
This is one of the many ways that you're leaving your legacy. And I'm really, thankful and grateful to be a part of that.
Yeah, man. Again, you will be back.
Thank you.
So, we'll get the production going. Yeah, man. We're gonna do it. We're gonna do it big. So I appreciate you and thank you. And I will definitely hit you up sooner than later. All right.
All right.
All right.
All right.
Peace.
Peace out, bean sprout.